Hi, I am Sonia Luna, CEO and founder of Aviva Spectrum, an internal audit and compliance consulting firm headquartered in sunny Los Angeles, California. I'm also a speaker and writer on topics like COSO 2013, SOX 404, quality assessment reviews, and internal audit-related topics. Today's interview, which I'm very excited about, is with Linh Truong. Linh Truong has over 20 years of audit experience, and she's currently the Director of Internal Audit at Kosmos Energy. It's a oil and gas exploration and production company. Now, prior to joining Kosmos Energy, Linh worked for Alon USA, Hunt Oil, Xerox, Suisse Group, and KPMG. Her extensive audit career has provided her the opportunity to travel throughout the U.S., Canada, Europe, as well as parts of Africa and the Middle East. Linh has launched internal audit departments literally from ground zero and established first-year SOX compliance programs, as well as spearheaded an enterprise risk management process for two very large companies. Welcome, Linh.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we were connected through the GRC conference, and when I heard you speak, at the GRC conference this year on the subject of ERM, I was floored. I was like, this is great. This is awesome content. I loved your presentation. So just to share, could you briefly share with our listeners what do you believe to be the 5 attributes for an effective enterprise risk management process?
Sure, absolutely. So, so many companies want to do ERM and do it right, and so many people get it wrong, and I've kind of boiled down the 5 key attributes for making it successful. And so it needs to be owned. Secondly, relevant. Third, measurable. Fourth, that it's monitored. And finally, it evolves and adapts with the company. So starting with owned, it really needs to be owned by senior management. I know a lot of enterprise risk assessments and ERMs start in the internal audit group because we need to know what the highest risks of the companies are so we can align the audit plan to it. And if the company currently doesn't have one, internal audit typically is the source or the function that starts that process. But eventually it needs to be transitioned and owned by senior management. And at the large companies, there's actually a chief risk officer that's all they do is manage the company's risks. So that's the first one. And then secondly, it needs to be relevant. So relevant in 2 ways. The first way it needs to be relevant is obviously, ERMs or enterprise risk assessments are a snapshot in time. So that's your top risk at that time that you did it. So it really needs to be updated once a quarter, ideally. But I've seen smaller companies do it annually. And then the second way it needs to be relevant is that it needs to be aligned with the company's corporate strategic objectives. So if you list all the corporate objectives for that year or 5 years, then what are the risks that could derail achieving those objectives? And then you work on implementing the activities that will mitigate those risks so that you can facilitate reaching your corporate objectives. And then, it really needs to be measurable. So you can't manage what you don't measure. So you really need to establish KPIs, metrics that you want everybody in the company to stay within. So outside of these metrics, you start to get into the risk area that exceeds what the board or management is willing to accept. So a perfect example of that is HSES. So that risk, a lot of companies have that risk as one of their top risks. And so the metric there that typically you measure against, or one of the metrics, would be, how many injuries are acceptable to the company per year. I know that sounds awful, but it's inevitable. It's almost impossible to keep a perfect record. So, how many injuries is acceptable, and you try to stay within that metric. And if you exceed it, then there are consequences. You have to change your processes. You have to do something differently. So that's a perfect example of that. And then, obviously, once you measure something, you can now start to manage it or monitor it. So management should be meeting on the ERM risks once a quarter, or at least annually, to look at the progress, see where the challenges are, what's being done, what's not being done. Are the things we're doing working? Is it effective? Are the metrics going down? Are the actual metrics staying within the target metrics? So you need to keep looking at it and having discussions at that senior management level. And then also, at the board level, hopefully the board is also interested in management's processes around ERM. So it's not a quarterly thing maybe, but agenda item needs to show up maybe once a year on a rotating basis. And then finally, it needs to be evolving and adaptable. So is your company growing or is it shrinking? Is it getting into new countries? Is your company getting into new service lines, getting more complex? And so with that, how robust your ERM process is should kind of adapt to that. Either you need to simplify or you need to bring on more layers and better reporting, more robust reporting. So in a nutshell, those are the 5 key attributes for a successful ERM.
Right, and I really appreciate kind of the simplicity of those 5 in the presentation that you gave and sharing with our listeners. And I really have seen both successful, just to relate it to SOX 404, if management doesn't really own the process, they don't understand the measurement, they don't want to or at least revisit the process annually to say, hey, is this really relevant? Are we reviewing this every year at least to make it better? I've just seen constant failures. You follow, like you're setting yourself up for failure. Failure, not so much, let's say, you're reporting a material weakness. No, you're going to pass, but the people working and doing it, it's just it's a drag.
Yeah.
Like they come into work
it's
and they're
homework
like
assignment on top of their day job, and it shouldn't be that. It should be a part of their day-to-day activities.
Exactly. Yeah, it should be ingrained in the culture. It really should be part of the company's. We're here to do business. We're here because of our customers and our mission statement. But what we do and how we do it is to be the best of breed, or to move forward in that process. Whether it's for SOX 404, ERM, whatever it may be, and those people who take that attitude and have actions behind it end up, I see, succeeding well beyond some of these other startups where the management just didn't even want to own it. I mean, that was just the first thing. That was a big red flag for me when I was just doing external audits when I was at Ernst & Young, and I was like,
implicit in the words owned by senior management is executive support.
Exactly.
And without executive support for the ERM process, I don't care how good your processes and methodology and tools are for doing the ERM, it will fail if you don't have executive support.
Yeah, and I definitely remember that was like one of the first things you talked about, and I think it really resonated with a lot of the folks, not only at the conference, but it's going to resonate with our listeners here today. And I wanted to ask you, how do you integrate ERM, with strategic goals of an organization and make it relevant to everyone?
Okay, so the trick is, once you link up your ERM and identify the risks that are related to achieving your corporate strategic objectives, once you do that, the second step is hopefully, the way the company does their individual goals and objectives are linked to the corporate strategic objectives. Why wouldn't they be, right? But hopefully they do link up. And if they do link up, if everybody within the company writes their individual goals and objectives based upon what the corporate strategic objectives are, regardless of your role or responsibility, you have, to some extent, you play a role and you impact it somehow, however little or however greatly, then you compensate people, right, on achieving their individual goals and objectives. You compensate senior executives on how well they achieve the corporate strategic goals and objectives. So everybody in the boat is rowing in the same direction, right? We're not struggling with competing resources. One person is rowing this way and the other person is rowing, the opposite way, and they're both rowing as fast and as hard as they can, and they're not getting anywhere. So everyone's aligned in the same direction, trying to achieve the same goals within their small world. And so then if the ERM is also linked to the corporate strategic objectives, then people are basically, in achieving their individual goals and objectives, which are linked to the corporate level ones, they are mitigating risks because they are doing what is necessary to mitigate the risks that impede their ability to reach the corporate strategic objectives because they're doing it on an individual basis. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I love the way you phrased the, writing down, right, your goals. I mean, if you've read any type of self-help book or, we as human beings, when we write stuff down, it becomes more relevant, more tangible, more achievable, more measurable, and more gratifying. Let's face it. When they don't feel like they're just an insignificant part of the company, they feel like, well, wait a minute, I'm part of this team that's trying to achieve a greater good, and their role is important, and they do have a lot of value to provide to the organization, regardless as to the individual title that they have on a business card. So I really appreciate you kind of honing in on that writing piece of it, because I'm a big fan of that as well.
Yeah. And hopefully people aren't writing it down on the back of a napkin. Hopefully this is a company-wide initiative where they have a formal way of establishing and documenting everyone's individual goals and objectives, and then at the end of the year, your performance is measured against how well you achieve that.
Right.
And compensated, yeah.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I mean, it sounds so just basic and somewhat intuitive to do that, but yet it's lacking in the marketplace. I know it is, because we've asked some of our when it gets to performance evaluations, we have to evaluate, well, how do we know people still know about the ethics programs you follow or the policies? Because, yeah, sure, the onboarding process, they're signing off on a bunch of things. They're acknowledging they know the employee manual. They're signing off that they know where everything is at in terms of the procedures if there's an ethical issue. And we always tell our companies that we consult with is that's a golden opportunity on your performance evaluation to align this process of compliance to a greater good and telling them about ethics as well, so we get kind of double bang for our buck when we try to audit, saying if you just have this small area in the performance evaluation, it could even be a box, but as long as it's truly happening where the supervisor's informing them or asking them questions about their training that align to, let's say, their core role and responsibility and how that aligns to a written goal that they both agreed aligns to the corporate objectives, that's actually a morale boost. And the unfortunate thing is
where their piece of the puzzle fits into the big picture, and that they do make an impact. When they come to work every day, the things that they do, no matter how small it may seem, this is how it impacts the greater organization's ability to achieve its corporate objectives.